Good evening and welcome to the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm Steve Lance. Here's a look at what's coming up. Should Americans know more about UFOs? The House deciding no when it recently stripped an amendment from the National Defense Authorization Act. The amendment would have forced the government to be more transparent with Americans about the unidentified phenomenon. Coming up, we'll talk to the head of geopolitics and UAP research at the Malone Institute, an organization whose goal is to bring integrity to government, sciences, and medicine. Americans have long been fascinated with the possible existence of UFOs, now being called UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomena. And yet the mid-December defense budget bill rejecting publicizing UAP information. In tonight's special edition of Capitol Report, we'll bring you our interview with Justine Eisenhinker, who heads up geopolitics and UAP research at the Malone Institute, an organization whose goal, among other things, is to bring integrity to this subject and to government. I spoke with her before the House rejected the Senate's push to amend the defense bill to require UAP info be made public. Justine Eisenhinker, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, Justine, you've actually been writing on Substack with Dr. Robert Malone regarding the United States government concealment of UFOs, otherwise known as unidentified anomalous phenomenon is what they're calling it now. These UAPs are subject of a lot of skepticism. You have a bipartisan effort between Republican Senator Mike Rounds, Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer introducing a bill. I want to play some sound of Chuck Schumer on the Senate floor and get your reaction.
Finally, on UAEs. While it's not related to China, House Republicans are also attempting to kill another common-sense bipartisan measure passed by the Senate, which I was proud to co-sponsor with Senator Rounds as the lead sponsor, to increase transparency around what the government does and does not know about unidentified aerial phenomena. Unidentified aerial phenomena generate intense curiosity for many Americans, and the risk for confusion and misinformation is high if the government isn't willing to be transparent.
What kind of misinformation could result if Congress is not willing or does not act to open up these records?
Well, I would say that the misinformation is a continual disinformation campaign that's been unrolling for the last 80 years, as David Grush has alleged when he did his interview on News Nation. And that disinformation has been to effectively say that if you have seen something or come across something or experienced something that is inexplicable, then there's something wrong with you and that the phenomenon doesn't exist. And that has been a stigma that's been associated with UFO sightings, what they're now calling UAPs, the destigmatized terminology.
Do you think this is by design, perhaps?
I honestly think that it is by design by a certain contingent within the government. Well, I do think it's by design. The why is the question that keeps coming up, and we don't know the why. Why would you not open up all the information that you have and say, okay, here's everything we have. This doesn't exist and it makes no sense, or, you know, yes, we have craft, we have alien bodies, we don't know what these are. Yet the reason that they're not doing that is the question that everyone is asking. The government should be comfortable unless there's something nefarious going on. And I think that's where the confusion with people lies, is that if the government was doing something that was benign, then there's no problem sharing it. You still have the intelligence community, you know, in hand with the Department of Defense, withholding information from the people that pay their salaries.
Is this, or could it be, like the fox guarding the hen house?
Absolutely. That's the excuse they've had for decades, is that it's about national security. Well, why is it about national security? And
it has eerie similarities to something else in more recent times.
Yes.
Doesn't it?
Very much so.
In terms of, locked down for a few months for the good of your neighbor and social distance and things like that. We found out didn't actually help.
The playbook that the government has been using for the last 80 years was refined and, effectively put into action very well with COVID. You know, the control of the message through the manipulation of media, of social media, of influencing people, of terrorizing people. All of that has its roots in what they've done on the UFO disinformation campaign that they've been running. And that just triggers my interest, because suddenly you're asking yourself, well, I now know through Robert and through the tons of research that I've done and the conferences that I've gone to with him, that the government lied openly, brazenly. And why would you use your playbook, if you're telling the truth? You don't need that. You're just, naked before all, so to speak. But again, that manipulation strikes me as, what are you hiding?
Do you think there are some lawmakers that simply do not want transparency on this UAP topic?
I think that's absolutely the case.
Why?
There's two reasons. The first, David Grush alluded to on his podcast with Joe Rogan recently, which is there are people that like to be the power brokers of knowledge. They like to be the all-knowing, all-seeing, all-powerful people in our government that have all the information, but you can't have any. And that apparently is some big ego boost, and that I've heard from other sources too. When it comes to, what the direct motivation, no doubt there's financial motivation involved. There certainly are many defense contracting companies that are sponsoring a number of the Republicans that pushed back against this particular Schumer amendment. And it's unclear whether that actually happened or not, but that is the assumption everyone's leading to, and none of them are coming out and objected to any of those allegations. And the dead silence is frustrating for all of us, because we were led to believe, when I say we, those that are following the subject with an avid interest, were led to believe that the Schumer amendment and the bill that the House passed very recently that contained the Schumer amendment, as well as Tim Burchett's 1.5-page amendment, were bipartisan, and that there was broad consensus that that's what we wanted. Turns out, and a lot of us were blindsided that what they actually passed was a very narrow scope of the Schumer amendment that only really referred to the National Archives, stripped out eminent domain, stripped out the review panel, subpoena powers. It neutered it.
Hello and welcome back to the Capitol Report. I'm Steve Lance. We're going to continue to look into why Congress continues to hide intelligence from the American people on the subject of UFOs. On December 14th, it cut an amendment from the defense bill that would have disclosed key information about UAP phenomenon. I want to talk about the significance of this amendment. We're talking, the Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, very powerful individual, credible individual to many people. Inside of this bill, it essentially suggests that there are legacy programs, meaning a collaborative of government and private sector and academia that have been researching and reverse engineering and examining unidentified aerial objects, as well as they call it biological material. So essentially bodies of aliens, right? Like that's what the bill says in just so many words. So how do we know about these legacy programs and who is involved? We
know about them from various whistleblowers over the decades. There have been people that have come forward and spoken. Of course, they've been demonized by mainstream media. They have been marginalized. They have been shut down. They have been ignored. And ignoring is the most powerful thing the corporate media does. I mean, the corporate media has completely ignored the Schumer amendment to a large extent. New York Times did a very pathetic review of it and hasn't really followed up with anything meaty. Certainly, nothing on mainstream news, barring News Nation and a few others, and of course, epochTimes. There just hasn't been a wide open, transparent push. I mean, if you compare it to COVID, where you couldn't get away from a station that wasn't putting up numbers of score of dead people and how wonderful the vaccines are, it was everywhere. You have nothing like that with the amendment. It just was quiet. And unfortunately, so has Schumer been quiet about it. He hasn't come forward since the bill was passed by the conference committee. But there's definitely something behind it, because that language doesn't come from nothing. That comes from talking to people like David Grush, who gave 10 to 11 hours of testimony to a closed-door hearing. He brought, I believe, all of his 40 witnesses that he had based his whistleblower claim on, as well as the information that he has relied upon is been based on 40 whistleblowers that came to him directly. He brought those before Congress. They've got the information. We don't. And I mean, we're the ones that are paying their bills. And that's the thing that I find frustrating is it's a very patronizing view of government to say you can't handle the information.
You've written about the issue of ontological shock, which is when somebody is forced to question their beliefs prior to that moment. And so I guess, with that said, if this was to be rolled out and the government were to tell, us that this does exist and who knows what, how would the American people react to that?
I was at the Soul Foundation conference in November that Gary Nolan ran. He is a professor at Stanford University, and a number of other professors from top universities over there. Their whole ambition with the Soul Foundation is to legitimize and professionalize the study of UAPs across all universities, and make it a subject that isn't open for ridicule anymore, and that people can do that without being stigmatized. And what I found was interesting, a lot of people talked about ontological shock in those presentations.
Grush, he's also reportedly said that UAPs may not be extraterrestrial, but may be coming from a higher dimensional or a different dimensional physical space here on Earth. He also said he believes the aircrafts are made out of materials not from our planet. So with that said, are there valuable scientific lessons about these UAPs?
Absolutely.
Of public interest, and such as for technology or medicine potentially?
Absolutely, and that's why you have someone like Professor Avi Loeb, who's got the Galileo Project at Harvard University. He's out there collecting spherules from anomalous objects that flew into our hemisphere that behaved differently to what they've seen, comets or asteroids behave. And the idea is to understand what is those materials, what do they consist of, how can we replicate that. There is a lot of talk by certain people that the opportunity to develop better clean technology, right, better energy, unlimited energy, how that would change and revolutionize life on Earth. But if there is an alternate universe of beings that have more advanced technology, why would our governments be able to have any power? They don't have any power. It disempowers them. If there's something more advanced that interacts with us that they can't defeat or they can't control. It's all speculation, because until the government really comes clean, we're operating on a handful of whistleblowers that, really are. Some are very, very highly qualified. Some are decorated military officers. They come from, very established institutions. These are very legitimate, very credible people that the government, in some cases, is given very high security clearances to. And the government wouldn't do that if these guys were crazy. Governments have shown that if they distract a population sufficiently, they'll ignore it. And that's kind of where we're at. They didn't report it in the mainstream media. It was very low key. And I think that the problem in not doing it is we run the risk now that someone like China or Russia could decide, we've been working and reverse engineering alien tech for the last 20, 30 years. We now have a new super artificial intelligence computer. We have a new hypersonic missile. We have some incredible craft that we want to deploy. Those nations could easily just move far ahead of us. And one of the complaints that we have about stovepiping all this research into one or two military sort of defense contractors is that you're not exposing it to a wide group of scientists that would have better expertise. You're allowing, or you're missing the opportunity of having the benefit of collaboration between scientists in different groups to come forward and say, okay, we're dealing with a piece of tech. We have, you know, a material scientist, we have an astrophysicist, we've got a physics guy, we've got a chemist, we've got, you know, 20 scientists all looking, talking, collaborating on how do we reverse engineer, how do we use the tech. They don't do that in these military industrial complexes. They stovepipe it so that no one will know what they're working on. And they won't be able, even if they did disclose, they won't know the full scope of what they're working on.
So I want to go back to the stigma of the folks that either blow whistles or have sightings and so forth. I've heard instances of airline pilots who have seen things in the air, unidentified flying objects, and are basically forced to not say anything because of the fear of losing their job, being deemed insane for you know, having these illusions. Speak to that issue and how that is being addressed.
There's a guy called Ryan Graves, who's a former F-18 pilot, I believe, who started Americans for Safe Aerospace as a foundation. And the reason he did that is because pilots are coming across craft of unknown origin. Meaning, when you say unknown origin, it doesn't have a prosaic attribution, right? We don't know what it is. It's not identifiable as Russian or Chinese or North Korean. Certainly not anything we know in Earth. And they, when they get back to base, they're told, well, okay, now you have to be debriefed for 10, 12 hours, and we're going to treat you like you're insane. And you have to, you know, give us all the information that you have, all the documents, you can't talk about it. And that is a huge burden to have on pilots. And Tim Burchett also talks about it, where he's like, well, you know, the guys that are out there defending our airspace are the ones that you're making the enemy in that situation through the interrogations and forcing them to you know, basically erase the videos that they've taken and to pretend they haven't seen anything. And then what are we doing about the safety of our aerospace? I mean, we don't have, clearly, we don't have what they call all domain dominance, right? We don't have control of our aerospace. And that, I think, is the big issue. And I mean, you know, maybe that's not what the Department of Defense wants to admit, but that's the reality. A lot of these sightings happen when these pilots are training out in the middle of the ocean. I think it was the Gimbal event where they saw a squadron of these unidentified objects, and that, you know, only when you dig a little deeper do you understand like how terrifying that must be to a pilot, where suddenly you're coming across and it's not a MiG and it's not anything that you've ever seen before, and it's in your training space. It's a safety issue, it's a security issue, and pilots who we've trusted, we've vetted, we've trained exceptionally highly should be given all the opportunity to explain what they've seen and to work with officials in uncovering what they are, and not be treated as if they're insane or they've somehow done something wrong.
What if, hypothetically, these beings didn't have our best interest at...
That's the thing that Tucker Carlson alluded to in his recent episode about it. Yes, that could very well be the case, but then shouldn't we know that? Right? How you know, and Tucker's assertion is not one that's new. He basically said that, you know, the reason that they don't want to tell us is, number one, they've committed crimes, right? They've murdered people, they've harmed people to prevent the truth from getting out. And number two, they did these deals and agreements with various extraterrestrials that in return for technology, they would have the right to abduct Americans. Now that is a very extreme accusation, and one that gets, you know, thrown around a lot in UFO circles. It would be good to know if that, you know, is it going on, because what measures could we take to prevent that? There is a massive group of what they call experiencers, people who have had things happen to them, be it abductions or other, you know, interactions that haven't been very positive. Again, could they be crazy and attention-seeking? Potentially. If you've ever followed Whitley Strieber, he certainly doesn't relate a very positive experience, although I've met the gentleman. He's very sane, he's very normal, he doesn't look like he wants attention. He's certainly not on TikTok doing videos about his experiences. So that leads me to believe that, you know, their experiences are real to them. How provable they are, how verifiable they are from a scientific perspective, we don't know, but it may be something that also needs to be looked at, right? And, you know, should the US government have done something like this and done some kind of nefarious agreement, but it's not unforeseeable, as we've experienced, that there is a willingness of short-term sacrifice for individual financial gain. That happens, unfortunately, in powerful elites.
Certainly a situation like that would be deserving of a pretty serious disinformation campaign.
Look what they've done with COVID, and that wasn't anything near as, you know, comparatively nefarious, although I don't know, that's a discussion for another time. But certainly they, you know, pulled no stops in what they could do to, you know, cancel people, basically undermine anyone that had an opinion that contradicted theirs, and rewrite history as often as they could. And a lot of UFO experts, and I use the word experts because I think they're an incredibly intelligent community that spend a lot of time reading and studying and writing. We should see what they have.
Very interesting discussion. Justine Eisenhenke, thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
And that is all we have for you this evening on this special edition of the Capitol Report. Thank you so much for watching. From Washington, D.C., I'm Steve Lance. Have a great weekend. See you back here Monday.